Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, and hopefully in slightly more better quality than what we've been working with the last couple of weeks. I finally got myself a camera, so we're taking a couple of steps forward here and hopefully I'm looking a bit more crisp than I usually do. But I have unfortunately been MIA the last couple of weeks. I've had so much uni work, so much like bits and bobs that I've been doing, seeing family, all that kind of stuff over Easter, and so I just really not had the time to sit down and have a chat about what's been going on in F1, but I'm back today and ready to go and talk about what's been happening. So I'm going to do a quick run through, quick recap of Saudi Arabia and Australia because I missed both of those. I didn't miss it, like I watched them, but I missed my upload slot, I suppose, for both of those, and then we'll do a quick preview for Japan, Suzuka, which I'm really excited for because it is definitely one of my personal favourite tracks of the season. So let's get into it. First and foremost, let's do some recaps. So looking back to Saudi Arabia, in all honesty, I don't think there's really that much to pick up on, but if there is one thing that needs to be spoken for, it is of course Ollie Bearman and his absolutely tremendous go in the Ferrari. Obviously Carlos had to dip out that weekend because of his appendicitis, which I don't know, ended up being a bit of a benefit in the end, I guess. But for this weekend, talking about Saudi specifically, unfortunate for Carlos, but great for Ollie, P7 I believe in the end, and on his Formula 1 debut, and also really not the first time we've seen a driver get a debut in Formula 1 after someone having appendicitis, with of course Alex Albon having to take time out of Williams for his appendicitis, meaning that Nick de Vries stepped into that position and eventually got a seat in the AlphaTauri last year. Now, could this be a similar omen for Ollie? Could we see Ollie get an F1 seat in the near future? I don't know. Could we see him in a Haas maybe, but them being a customer team for Ferrari? Potentially Stake with them also being a customer team for Ferrari? I don't know, it's a big year for driver transfers and stuff like that, so in summer, silly season is definitely going to be something to watch out for. But yeah, Ollie is an incredibly talented driver. If you don't watch F2, I mean, watch F2 anyway, it's very, very entertaining, but putting that to one side, Ollie's been great, especially last year. I believe it was Baku he had a particularly good weekend last year, so if you're interested in like re-watching any races in particular, I would say the F2 race in Baku for Ollie last year was great. I do think there is currently a real backlog of talented drivers and them trying to get into F1, and there being a lot of senior drivers or more experienced drivers who are holding on to their seats, potentially for a little bit longer than maybe they should. I don't know, that's a conversation for another video, I guess. But yeah, I'd love to see Ollie in F1. I think he would do a great job with a little bit of backing. So yeah, like I said, that's a conversation for another time. So moving back to Jeddah, the actual topic of conversation. Here we saw Max take his second F1 win of the season and the second Red Bull 1-2 of the season as well, with Perez coming in second. Which at the time made the season look pretty dull and pretty dark. We sort of saw that second race and we were thinking, oh god, like not again. Another Red Bull 1-2, another Max win. I think I've seen this film before, you know, like I know where this is going. However, as we know now, especially in F1, not everything is as it seems. In that race, we also saw Charles Leclerc go on to take the podium. Pairing that with the result in Australia, that means that Ferrari are the only team so far to be on the podium for every race. Well, they will be the only teams to be on the podium for every race if they continue on podiums for the rest of the season. Obviously, I know we're only 3 races into the season, but it's still a bit of an interesting statistic, and it kind of shows that Ferrari are where they want to be right now and where they should be right now, especially taking into account the last year or two. It's a great position for Ferrari to be in. Oscar Piastri also looked pretty good in the McLaren this weekend. He got P4, I believe, at the end, and currently sits higher than Lando in the standings overall. That's great in terms of competition within McLaren. Yeah, a little bit of healthy competition goes a long way, especially in Formula 1. It's nice to see, especially with Oscar and Lando being young drivers, really getting into it. Obviously Lando's got a lot more experience in F1, but it's still nice to give a bit of competition, especially in a competitive car now, so that'll be interesting to watch unfold as the season kind of develops. Not a great race for Mercedes at all. I mean, George came in P6, which I suppose isn't too bad all things considered, and considering who was ahead of him, but it's not where we expect Mercedes to be. But then arguably, is it where we expect Mercedes to be? I mean, they've not been good, so I would actually argue that that point is where we would expect to see them at the end of the race nowadays. But still not great overall, and then Lewis just wasn't a good race for him. I also want to highlight Alpine in Saudi Arabia. They made a couple of really good big strides, with Ocon I believe finishing in P13. Obviously Pierre unfortunately did DNF in this race, but the improvement for Alpine, in at least within Ocon's result, was definitely good. I don't know if this was necessarily the track that was better suited to them. I don't know if they made any big adjustments to the car coming into this race, but the track at least seemed a little bit more suited to them in that position. Didn't get any points, but still an improvement to take forward into Australia. And the other team that I really want to highlight here is Haas. They obviously gained a point with Nico Hülkenberg finishing in the points. And they've really evolved this season. I spoke about this in my last video that I did. The Haas have really made some good strides this season. Their car looked great in that pre-season sort of video I did about looking at the new cars. I thought that Haas looked to be improved, or were going to make improvements, and I said that dealing with tyre deg was going to be their biggest thing this season, and honestly they've done a great job of that, I think. Especially looking at this race in particular, looking at Kevin and how he was able to defend those cars for Nico to get that point is something that we wouldn't have been able to see from Haas the last couple of years. So all in all, I think they've improved dramatically, and I'm excited to watch Haas, and I'm excited to watch Haas in Japan as well, because this is going to be a big test for their tyres. So that's a little recap of Saudi out the way. Now let's move on to our most recent race in Australia. Now I'm actually unsure if I've mentioned this on the channel. I know I've mentioned it on the podcast, but I don't know if I mentioned it on YouTube. I'm a massive Carlos Sainz fan. He's my favourite driver on the grid. He was my favourite driver. When I first got into F1, he was the one I gravitated towards. Carlos Sainz is my sort of top driver. And I, obviously, this weekend made me incredibly happy in terms of the result. We got the 1-2 from Ferrari, and then also the win from Carlos, which was just great. Now, we can't ignore the elephant in the room making this happen, of course, being Max Verstappen and his DNF. His first DNF, I believe, in 2 years. Don't quote me on that. I think it was 2022 was his last DNF, but I don't know. Now, of course, Red Bull mistakes are very, very few and far between. We don't see them happen often. But I guess the important thing for other teams in this position is for them to be close enough behind the pack so that when Max does have races like this, they can jump on that opportunity, and Ferrari did exactly that this weekend, and they did a great job of it. Fred's done a great job with the team, I think, and this is his first year fully immersed in the role of team principal for Ferrari, with his ideas being implemented and it being his way, and I think he's done a great job so far. Again, I know it's only 3 races in, so I'm not gonna, put too much, I guess, pressure and thoughts and feelings towards it, but I am very, very impressed so far. In general, the Ferrari does look a lot stronger on race pace than they did last season, which is also a good thing. In quali they were fine last season, but it was race pace which is where they were struggling. So I am excited to see sort of how this can develop, especially in those races that do suit the car more when we look into things like Monza and stuff like that. I'm very excited to see, because obviously Monza they performed well last year, so I'm expecting similar from this year as well. Now, do I think they're realistically in a position to challenge Red Bull and Max? No, I think, again, as I mentioned, Red Bull mistakes are very few and far between. We're not going to see it, and on those weekends where they're not making mistakes, they're going to amp it up to the max, excuse the pun, because they're going to want to make sure that that gap in the constructors, and not so much in the drives because we know that Max can do it, but in the constructors especially, with Perez dropping some points here and there, they want to make that gap as big as possible, so they are going to really put it all in. I think we do need to remember, we can make that argument about Perez dropping points for the team, but we do need to remember that last year Max could have single-handedly won the constructors for Red Bull, so the strength does come from him in this team specifically, and he's going to be the one that needs to have the issues if we're going to see any more closeness. I do think on stats alone Ferrari are looking a lot closer to Red Bull, but is it enough to necessarily realistically week in week out challenge them? I don't think so at the minute. I think we do just need to keep our cool a little bit on the situation and just sort of see how the season unfolds, and I'm saying this as a Carlos Sainz fan and as a Ferrari fan. Now, on the topic of Carlos, where do I think he's going to end up in terms of his seat? Because he's obviously going to get a seat, that's no question in my mind. I think, I said this ages ago, I said it on my podcast, I said it way before Lewis was announced as well, that I thought that Carlos was going to end up at Audi. When Audi were announced, I was like, yeah, that's a Carlos seat in my opinion. But that says, as Perez starts to dwindle a little bit, and as the sort of situation there starts to flicker out, because at the start of the season I was pretty much convinced that Perez was going to get another year maybe in the seat, or it wouldn't have been too much of an issue for him to get that. But if he continues performing this way and Carlos is performing the way he is, I think that Red Bull temptation could be there. I think with Carlos's position now, with the age that he's at too, he wants something good and consistent, something that he can get a decent shot of race wins in, and when Max isn't performing, he can take those race wins from him. I think he'll want a championship. I think realistically, I don't know if it's going to be there within at least before 2026, because with the situation we're in now with the cars, I think that Max will win this year and probably next year too. I think post 2026 is when we can start looking at different people in terms of championship wins and stuff like that. It's a very, very tricky position, but obviously equally to that point, what if Carlos joins Red Bull and he doesn't get on with the setup? He has a bit of a Perez situation with the setup where it's just too much for him, because we know that Max takes everything to the absolute maximum. Max takes things to the maximum on all the setup, things like that. So what if Carlos doesn't get on with that in particular? You could have issues where if he stays in Red Bull long term past 2026, potentially if he got that seat, everyone else is able to sort of catch up with those new regulations, and then it kind of gets to a point where would he have been better off somewhere else? I don't know, it's a massive gamble. Anywhere he goes is a huge gamble. I think he knows that. He just needs to be smart about it. I do think, though, that Carlos is in a great position right now. He's performing really, really well. 3 of 5 of the top 10. 3 out of 5 of the big 3 teams, so looking at Mercedes, Aston Martin and Red Bull, all potentially have a seat that they could give him. Ferrari and Mercedes, obviously the only 2 that won't. So it will be interesting to see. Do I think he will be at Red Bull? I think there is a chance. I do think there's a chance. I would love to see it. Yeah, I don't know. Time will tell on that one, I think. Now, moving back to Australia, McLaren looked nice in Australia with them getting P3 and P4, Lando on the podium, which was a good race for them, and finishing above Perez, which I actually found quite interesting, especially speaking about what we just sort of mentioned there. I do think we need to give credit to Lance Stroll with this race in particular, with his eventual P6 finish, and Yuki with his eventual P7. Yuki, I think, is a massively underrated driver in Formula 1. I think he's done a great job with the Racing Bull, and I think when you look at him in comparison to Daniel, I don't know, there's a conversation there. I do think Daniel's a good driver. I'm not going to sit here and talk about Daniel Ricciardo and get into that whole lore right now, but that is a conversation to be had another time on this channel, I think. But yeah, great result for Yuki. Again, I think Haas is another good team to bring up in Australia. They finished in the points behind Alonso this weekend. I'm excited to watch Haas this season. I enjoy watching them. I think they're doing a great job. I really enjoy what they've done with the car. I think the concept is working well for them, especially in that midfield battle. I can't tell you on the top of my head where else they are in the midfield in terms of points. I can't remember. I'll have to have a look. I'll probably put it up here, but yeah. I am excited for Haas, and I get to a point now where it's like I don't think of them as a back marker when I do these reviews. Last year when I was doing it on the podcast, I was like, oh yeah, Haas, I should mention them. Now I'm like, I want to mention them because they're doing a good job and they've done a great job with the car, so definitely keep an eye out for Haas this weekend as well. Now, 2 quick things I want to touch on before we get on to Japan, and actual 2 points of controversy, I suppose, about this race in particular. 1 being Logan and 2 being George. So starting out with Logan and his race withdrawal. I felt really bad for him, I did. I love Logan, I've met him, he's genuinely a really lovely guy. However, this was the right choice for the team, 100%. At the end of the day, Alex was way more likely to score points in the Williams than Logan was, and I think people do seem to forget that when it comes to constructors, especially for these lower down teams, positions mean everything. It's a difference in money, a huge difference in money for them come the end of the season, and it's the money that they need to develop these cars further, to get further up, to get more money, to get to better points. Especially with a team like Williams that have such a rich history within Formula 1, I think they want to get further up there, at least further up in the midfield, and things like this will make a difference. If we get to the end of the season, there's a 1 point difference between like P7 and P6 or whatever it ends up being, then the gamble would have paid off. Obviously, we know that Alex didn't score this weekend, so the gamble didn't pay off, but it was something worth doing, I think, over than putting Logan in that position. Again, I love Logan. I really hope he gets some improvement. He's a lovely guy, and I think he does have talent. I want to see him sort of get that improvement out of the car, and I think he can. I think James Vowles is best suited to do that for him, but it's definitely a tricky one. I do empathise with James Vowles in particular for having to make that decision this weekend. The second thing that I want to talk about is the George Russell-Alonso crash. A few things here. Firstly, Alonso's penalty. Did he deserve a penalty? Yes. Did he deserve a 20-second penalty? I think it was harsh. I think it was definitely harsh considering the circumstances. I do think that if George hadn't have crashed out, he wouldn't have been penalised that harshly, or maybe would it have even been flagged up at all? I don't know, but it's just been like a sort of a steward's look at it and then leave it. It's a tricky one to tell. I think 20 seconds was too harsh on that note. From what I've seen on the telemetry data, it doesn't appear that what he was complaining about was causing much of an issue in his car. I've not looked at recent reports, but immediately after the stuff I did look at didn't look too telling of that. So, I don't know. I don't believe that he would have purposefully put George in that situation. But, yeah, it's just one of those things where you kind of have to trust what he was saying and just go from there. It did put George in a horrible situation though. And speaking of that, I've seen a lot of people talk about George and his call for a red flag, saying that he did it on purpose to make his points stick and his position stick, which is absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. The man was on his side in the middle of a track. You're going to be calling for a red flag. You're going to be like, if that was me in that situation, I'd be crying my eyes out. Like, just when we look at some of the recent like fatal crashes in F1, I completely understand. If a car is close to him, wanging around that corner, and they don't see him and they go into him, that's fatal. That is fatal. So I can completely understand the man was fearing for his life. Like, there is no way that would have been anything other than, I'm scared, this is what I'm going with. So yeah, do I think the race should have been red flagged? No. It was the final lap of the race. Cars still would have had to have gone past him to go into the pit lane if that had been sooner caught anyway. So, you know, I don't think he should have been red flagged, but I also don't think him calling for a red flag was the wrong thing to do. It wouldn't have made a difference, obviously, if it had been a red flag. Cars still would have had to go past anyway. So I think what they did was you know, it made sense, and I think it was a knee-jerk reaction, but yeah, some people are just so silly, honestly, I don't even know. But anyways, now that we have recapped Saudi and Australia, let's move on to Suzuka and talk a little bit about that. This is by far one of my favourite tracks to talk about all season. This, alongside Silverstone and Brazil, are probably my top three. I absolutely adore Suzuka. I love to talk about it. Now, just a couple of track facts for those of you who may be unaware or who want a quick reminder. It's a 53 lap long race. It's 5.807 kilometres in length, and Lewis Hamilton currently holds the lap record here. There is one DRS zone. I've got a picture. I should have a picture here as I'm talking through this. There is one DRS zone here between turns 15 and 16 with 18 turns in total. One of my favourite features on this track is the S's section, which you can see down this bottom part here between turns 3 and 7. We've also got a really tight hairpin up here somewhere. I don't even know if I'm pointing in the right place. I've got nothing here right now, so that's at turn 11. And then a really interesting part of this track is that it actually crosses over itself, so it's between turns 9 and 10 above and 14 and 15. We can see that cross section there, which is a really interesting feature of this track. Super high speed, super technically, mentally, physically challenging. Just a classic track. The man who designed this track also designed parts of the Hockenheim track, and I believe was a track manager for Zandvoort. Zandvoort's actually got an incredibly interesting history. When we get to Zandvoort on the calendar and I do the, I might not necessarily do a preview, but when I talk about Zandvoort at whatever point in the season we get to for it, I am so excited to sit here and tell you all about the history about Zandvoort, because it's so interesting. So definitely, if you don't know about it, research it. But anyway, Suzuka unfortunately does have a bit of a dark history in F1. Obviously, looking at the fatal Jules Bianchi crash in 2015, it throws up some big question marks about safety, especially when we look at things like weather. I haven't actually checked the weather forecast for this weekend, so I'm not sure what it's looking like. But in 2022, this did become an issue. There was, I believe, a typhoon in Japan. The weather was absolutely insane. It was chucking it down with rain. If you haven't watched that race, I do recommend watching it just to sort of see what the conditions can be like here, even recently. And it did unfortunately bring up an eerily similar situation for Pierre Gasly, with limited visibility. He couldn't see a recovery vehicle out on track to get a car that crashed. And if he had crashed into that tractor, it would have been fatal. And obviously, reminiscent of the Jules Bianchi crash that we did see here, this was especially bad. There are layers to this, obviously the relationship we got between Jules and Pierre, and Jules and Charles as well in particular. It was just a bad race for the sport, I think, as well. The situation with the race being called off in the end, and there was issues with the points and how that was being divvied up, and Max's championship. It was just confusing, and it was not a good day. So yeah, the potential for chaos is definitely here. There's a 67% chance of a safety car. I do believe, especially if we see rain here, the safety car will be called out at some point. I don't know if there is rain. Again, I've not looked at the weather, but potential for chaos is high, we'll say that. So looking at this race weekend, then what can we look forward to? So number one, Red Bull. Can they keep on? Can they bounce back? Yes, I believe they can. I think this is a very Red Bull favourable track. Japan is a good track for them. It has been in the past. It probably will be this weekend. So all going well, I think there'll be a Red Bull win this weekend at least. Potentially a 1-2 if Perez as well. I don't know about that. I'm not going to call that. But I think at least a Max win we will see, all going well for Red Bull. For Ferrari, their aim will be to at least stick behind, at least stick on those podiums this weekend if they can. This is a tricky track, but if they can stick to the podiums, that will definitely help them out, especially if they can kick Perez off. That'll be great for them. Now, Mercedes need to have a good weekend this weekend. It's crucial. They absolutely have to. I kind of get a very flat vibe from Mercedes at the minute. It feels as though some people have given up a little bit, so yeah, we need that. McLaren will be an interesting one to look out for as well this weekend, with them having a bit of a technical shuffle up in the team, David Sanchez being of mention here. So that'll be another interesting point to mention, I guess. Maybe not this weekend, but the next few weekends, seeing like how we develop going forward through the season. And then a nod to Yuki in particular. Again, I mentioned earlier, it's his home race. And a nod to Haas, who, again, I'm going to say I'm very excited to watch this weekend, and you should be too. And if you're not excited to watch Haas, then I don't know. I can't believe I'm at a point now where I don't care who wins the race, I just want to watch Haas. But that's where I'm at with F1 right now. But anyway, it's a fast-paced race. It's an exciting race. I absolutely love it. Tyre deg is going to be a big consideration. It will definitely be, or is likely to be, a multiple pit stop race. We've got twists and turns, high speed. The deg's going to be a bit all over the place, so again, with Haas. And with Ferrari as well, tyre management is going to be a big factor this weekend. But yeah, I'm very excited for the race this weekend. I think it'll be a good one. Japanese fans absolutely love Suzuka. They're always amazing. If you have seen clips from Suzuka of the fans, it's great. Japanese motorsport fans are insane. They're really, really great. So if you're out in, if you're out in Suzuka, I don't know how likely it is that you'll be watching this, but if you want to go to a race at any point that's international, if you're from the UK or from anywhere in the world, Suzuka would definitely be one on my bucket list personally. But yeah, that is my race preview and double recap done. I should be doing a review of Japan at some point next week, and then we'll get into the rest and hopefully get into more of a schedule going forward. Oh god, it's just gone really overexposed on my camera because the sun's just come out. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment, all the usual stuff. But yeah, have a great weekend.